to suck my parents. Hey, please come.
On July 10, 2001, in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, a frantic phone call reached the local police station. The caller was a 20-year-old named Sef Gonzales, who described a disturbing discovery upon returning home after a night out with a friend. As he stepped inside the house, he was confronted with a horrifying sight: the words, "Fuck off Asians KKK," painted on a wall. This was only an indication of the horrors that would be found inside. Why were these seemingly normal and quiet family members brutally murdered? Was it a hate crime? Or was there something more sinister happening behind closed doors? What ensued was a complex investigation into a tangled web of lies and the greedy tendencies of the sole surviving family member. Welcome to InsightWave, the channel that delves into both solved and unsolved cases from around the world. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest crime stories delivered straight to your inbox. Sef Gonzales was born in Baguio, Philippines, into a locally prominent family. Following the 1990 earthquake, Teddy and Mary Loiva decided to immigrate to Australia with their 2 children. They ended up settling in the quiet neighborhood of Collins Street, North Ryde. Teddy pursued a career as an immigration lawyer, and on the surface, the Gonzales family seemed close-knit, with strict and devout parents who held high aspirations for their children. However, later evidence presented in court indicated that the Gonzales family was controlling and imposed harsh discipline on their children if they failed to meet their parents' high expectations. In particular, Teddy and Mary Loiva had hoped for academic excellence from Sef, but he struggled in his HSC and performed poorly in university courses. Claudine, on the other hand, was sent to Melbourne to finish high school after her mother disapproved of her boyfriend. Some observed that Sef had a tendency to stretching the truth and outright lying to impress people. He often had elaborate fantasies in which he portrayed himself as a successful businessman, model, and singer, going so far as to create a website supposedly run by a family friend, Daisy Diaz, as a tribute to himself. This behavior led some to characterize him as having a narcissistic personality and being a compulsive or pathological liar. Strangely, his lies often appeared credible due to his seemingly genuine demeanor. Sef even falsely claimed to have cancer among his friends. In an attempt to conceal his academic failures, Sef resorted to falsifying his results. When his parents discovered this deception, they threatened to revoke certain privileges, including the use of his car. Simultaneously, he clashed with his mother over a girlfriend she disapproved of. These conflicts, combined with Sef's desire to inherit the family's wealth, were established as motives for his murders of his parents and sister. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on July 10, 2001, Sef made his way into his 16-year-old sister's study room, where she was engrossed in her studies. He carried either a baseball bat or a bat closely resembling one, in addition to 2 kitchen knives he had retrieved from a knife block in the kitchen. Notably, these 2 knives were the lengthiest among the set in the block. It was found that he compressed Claudine's neck trying to strangle her, struck her at least 6 separate blows to the head with the bat and stabbed her many times with one or both of the knives. He inflicted 5 major stab wounds to Claudine's neck and 2 major stab wounds to her chest or abdomen. About 1 hour later, his mom Mary Loiva came home. Immediately upon entering the house, Sef attacked her with one of the kitchen knives in the living/dining room. He inflicted multiple stab wounds and cuts to her face, neck, chest and abdomen. Her windpipe was completely transected in the attack. Teddy arrived about 6:50 p.m. Very shortly after he entered the house, Sef attacked him with one of the kitchen knives and inflicted multiple stab wounds to his neck, chest, back and abdomen. One of the stab wounds penetrated his right lung, another penetrated his heart and another partially severed his spinal cord. After killing his family, Sef disposed of the knives he had used as well as the bat he had used in striking Claudine and the shoes and clothing he had been wearing at the time of committing the murders, which had become blood-stained. At some time in the evening, he also spray-painted the words, "Fuck off Asians KKK," on a wall in the house in an attempt to fool investigating police into believing that his family had been the victims of a hate crime. After committing the murders, Sef drove to a friend's residence, reaching there around 8 p.m. Accompanied by his friend Sam D'Ilio, who had no knowledge of the murders nor was informed about them, Sef and Sam ventured into the city. Their evening included a visit to Planet Hollywood and a nearby video game center. Later that night, after dropping off his friend, Sef returned to his home. Upon arrival, he placed a call to the police, alleging that he had stumbled upon the lifeless bodies upon reaching the house and had chased away potential intruders.
Someone has shot my parents. Hey, please come.
What's someone's what?
Someone has shot my parents. I think they're all breathing. They're on the floor.
What suburb are you in?
They're not breathing. What do I do?
What suburb are you in?
North right.
North Ride.
Yes.
And your parents are
They're not moving.
both been shot, have they?
I don't know. This is on the floor. It's my mom.
Just hold on. Yeah, we will. We're sending an ambulance now.
Initially, investigators were working on the theory that the disturbing graffiti could lead them to the killer. However, they also considered that potentially, the graffiti had been written in an attempt to throw them off the trail of the real killer. Another point of action for investigators was to determine what sequence the murders were carried out in. They believed that Claudine was attacked first in her room and then the killer waited for Mary to return home and then waited again for Teddy to come home. A couple of days after the murders, Sef would speak publicly for the first time. He said, "3 corners of my world are now gone. The best way I could possibly describe my father is that he was my hero and role model. My mother was the heart of the family. She was the heart of her friends and anyone who knew her. My sister was the life in the family. She was an expert in smiling and made us all believe that life should be taken lightly." He went on to say that when it was time for him to settle down and have a family of his own, he would name his son after his father. Investigators made it clear that no potential suspect, including Sef, had been ruled out in connection with the murders. Nevertheless, they did express contentment with his account of being in the city from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m., discovering his deceased family shortly before midnight. A friend provided corroboration for Sef's activities on that evening, confirming that they had dined at Planet Hollywood around 8 p.m. and then proceeded to a nearby video game arcade. The friend verified that Sef had dropped him off at home that night, after which Sef returned home alone and encountered the crime scene. As the month drew to a close, the family was laid to rest in a solemn ceremony. Their funeral took place at Holy Spirit Church, where Sef took the stage to deliver an a cappella rendition of Mariah Carey's "One Sweet Day."
Sorry, I never told you all I wanted to say.
The 3 flower-covered coffins lay side by side at the front of the church while Sef performed the eulogy. He spoke of the richness in his father's eyes before emotionally stating he would never know the meaning of his own name. His father had promised to tell him on his 21st birthday. The next year passed without any public updates. Nevertheless, it swiftly became evident that investigators were zeroing in on Sef as the primary suspect in the massacre of his family. Their suspicion had arisen almost immediately due to his unusual behavior. He discussed the murders in a very matter-of-fact manner and showed no signs of emotion. Consequently, the family's $1 million-plus estate had been frozen, leaving Sef unable to access any funds. Additionally, he was unable to claim victims' compensation. Just a day after Sef publicly expressed his distress at being considered a suspect in the murders, a peculiar and alleged abduction attempt unfolded. On June 2, 2002, an anonymous individual contacted the police to report an assault. Upon their arrival at the scene, they discovered Sef lying on the roadside with minor facial injuries. He recounted being on his way to a video shop when he was suddenly attacked and forcibly dragged into a car. Sef claimed that a plastic bag had been placed over his head, but he somehow managed to escape. Less than 2 weeks later, Sef found himself under arrest and facing charges related to the murder of his parents and sister. Investigators had unearthed evidence that Sef's parents had caught him attempting to falsify his university grades, and they had also rejected his girlfriend. According to the prosecution, these two factors constituted the primary motives for the murders, in addition to the desire to inherit their estate, which was valued at up to $10 million. The prosecution alleged that on the day of the murders, Teddy and Mary had spent the day at their law practice, while Claudine was alone at home. According to the timeline of the prosecution, after leaving the law practice at around 4 p.m., Sef came home and killed his sister. She had sustained blunt force trauma from a baseball bat and her neck was compressed. In addition, her throat had been slit. Sef then waited downstairs for his mother to return home and stabbed her to death in the lounge. After killing his mother, Sef lay in wait for his father to return at around 7 p.m. and he too was stabbed to death. All three victims had defensive wounds to their arms, indicating they had put up a fierce fight. An investigation into the family's background unveiled troubling aspects of Sef's life. He had been struggling academically at university, and Claudine had conveyed this to their parents. In response, their parents had issued a stern ultimatum: if Sef didn't improve his grades, they would revoke his access to his car. Subsequently, it came to light that Sef was more than just an occasional fibber, he was a habitual and compulsive liar, deceiving not only his family but also everyone who knew him. His false claims included portraying himself as a thriving entrepreneur, model, and a singer, even going so far as to establish a fraudulent fan website in his own name. Shockingly, on one occasion, Sef had fabricated a story about having cancer. Furthermore, investigators arrived at the unsettling conclusion that Sef had orchestrated his own abduction and had sent himself 2 menacing emails. The objective behind these actions appeared to be an attempt to create the illusion that the killer responsible for his family's murder was also targeting him. Before standing trial for the murders, it would further be uncovered that Sef had attempted to kill his family once before. Just days before the murders were carried out, Mary was hospitalized with acute food poisoning. Sef had engaged in an extortion campaign against a major food and beverage company and threatened contamination of their products. The murder trial commenced in May of 2004, shedding further light on the earlier poisoning plot. It was revealed that Sef had conducted research on poisons and acquired toxic seeds, from which he extracted poison. He subsequently administered poison to Mary, although she miraculously survived the attempted murder. Just 1 week later, he succeeded in killing both of his parents, as well as his sister. A significant portion of the trial's testimony revolved around scrutinizing Sef's alibi. Several neighbors reported seeing his car parked in the driveway. While he had accounted for his whereabouts from 8 p.m. onward by being with his friend, he needed a solid alibi for the earlier part of the day. Sef claimed he had been in the company of a sex worker, but this sex worker would later come forward and attest that Sef's claim was false. Additionally, evidence was presented linking the blue paint used for the racist graffiti at the Gonzales home to a blue spot discovered on one of Sef's sweaters. The prosecution held the belief that one of the motivating factors behind Sef's ruthless act of annihilating his family was the prospect of inheriting their wealth. A mere 3 months after the Gonzales family tragically met their end, Sef made a down payment for a $175,000 car. During this transaction at the Lexus dealership, he informed the salesman that he anticipated an inheritance from his family. However, after handing over the initial $5,000 deposit, he found himself unable to fulfill the remaining payment due to his status as the prime suspect in the triple murder. Furthermore, immediately following the murders, Sef made efforts to sell various items that had belonged to his family, including jewelry and watches. He successfully sold a white Mitsubishi Pajero registered to Mary for $45,000 and then a Toyota Celica registered to Teddy for $23,500. Ultimately, Sef Gonzales was found guilty of the murder of his parents and sister, receiving a sentence of 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. Outside of the courtroom, Sef's aunt, Emily Luna, expressed, "It's genuinely a somber day because we hold a deep affection for Sef. We will always cherish him."